Hello, welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Mary, and today's video I am finally going to be talking about the top 10 books that I read in 2023. So I have actually been able to curate a list that I think is pretty accurate to the order in which I enjoyed these books. And then I did make a most surprising books video before this so that I could talk about some of the books that I gave 5 stars that I was surprised by, but that didn't necessarily make my top books of the year, if that makes sense. And then I am planning on making up another video after this that will just wrap up my stats for 2023. I don't know how many stats I'm gonna keep track of because I did not keep track of them during the year, but that is forthcoming. So this video is going to be just me discussing the top 10 books that I read that I loved the most this year. And I'm really proud of myself for being able to actually cut my list down to only 10 books. I feel like in years past, I've had honorable mentions or top 15. But this year I did not have as many 5 stars as I feel like I normally do have. And it was just easier for me to pick clear favorites. I will say numbers 10 through 6 are like very set in their number. Really numbers 10 through 5 are like very set in their position in this order. The top 4 could probably be different on a different day, but this is how I'm feeling about it today. So without further ado, I am just gonna start at number 10. And the 10th best book that I read this year was Silver Nitrate by Silvia Moreno Garcia. And this is a horror book, and it's set in Mexico City, I believe in like the 80s or the 90s. And we're following 2 characters, Montserrat and Tristan. I think the characters are like close to 40, and Montserrat works in video editing. And Tristan used to be a telenovela star. He got into a car accident when he was pretty young in his career, so he has some facial scarring. So now he primarily does voice acting work. But he's kind of a washed up celebrity, and him and Montserrat have been friends since they were kids. And this book sort of follows their friendship. It's a little bit into the toxic friendship thing, but mostly in the sense that Montserrat has always kind of been in love with Tristan, and she has like a soft spot for him, although she kind of knows that a relationship between them wouldn't really work. Tristan also knows that she feels that way about him, and he definitely tends to use that to his advantage, which can be frustrating to read about. But the premise of this book is Tristan moves apartments. At his new apartment, there is a guy who is like an old school horror director in Mexico who made a bunch of cult classic films that him and Montserrat loved when they were kids, like teenagers. And so when Tristan meets him, he tells Montserrat, and they all go over to his house for dinner, and he tells them about this film that he was making with some of his friends when he was way younger that they never ended up making. And he asks for their help to make this film. And then the horror elements come from like Nazi style occultism. I won't lie to you, I don't know a ton. Like my knowledge of Nazi occultism comes from the Indiana Jones movies, so I'm pretty sure it's not accurate, but it's like that kind of thing. What I loved about this book is the tone of it makes it feel very noir. I haven't read a ton of noir style books, but when I think noir, I think of those like old school black and white detective shows and movies. And that's the vibe that I got while reading this book. It's not following a detective, but there is like an old school mystery. It reads very black and white. I don't know how else to explain it, but I loved that. That's like a tonal quality in writing that I really enjoy. And I think it stems from, I believe, this is my first Silvia Moreno Garcia, but I believe she typically writes Gothics. And because of that, she has a very atmospheric style of writing. I don't know if I would classify this as Gothic, because for me, Gothic, typically the setting is like one of the characters. Like that's the easiest way that I can think to describe Gothics. And the setting in this book is not so much a character, but it is a very rich atmosphere. And I loved this book. Like my jaw hit the floor at various points. I thought the occult magic was like very interesting. And I don't think it's like super unique in general, but I've never really read a book that features it, if that makes sense. So I think if you have read more things or experienced more media that feature the types of things in this book, it won't be as impactful for you, or at least that's what I've gleaned from watching other people's reviews. But for me, the story really worked for me. And as I learned this year, I really enjoy toxic friendship dynamics, apparently. The next book that I want to talk about, I read way back in January in preparation for the movie to come out, and that is A Man Called Uwe by Fredrik Backman. And this book has been a booktube darling forever, so I will try not to go too in-depth into it. And I also have a book versus movie adaptation if you've read the book and seen the movie and you want to see all my thoughts on that. I did make that back in January, I believe. But I loved this book. So it's about this old man named Uwe whose wife has died, and he is contemplating whether he's going to end his own life. And then a family of immigrants moves in across the street from him, and he has all these prejudices against these people. And he like doesn't want to be friends with them. He doesn't want to talk to anybody. He likes the rules of his apartment. And there's other neighbors that are like one neighbor I think is leaving his bike out, which makes Uwe really mad. So he keeps locking it up in the bike shed to where the guy can't get to it. And there's like various things like that going on in the neighborhood. So part of it is like just very charming and funny as like a third party watching this. Like it's a humorous exchange. But then the relationship that Uwe develops with this like young family that moves in across the street from him is so beautiful. And like the friendships and the found family aspects of everything, I feel like I'm gonna cry talking about it. Oh, I loved this book. I loved the way it explored the found family dynamics. I don't even know if this book is classified as found family, but this is the type of like found family that I like. So I thoroughly enjoyed that one. And I loved the movie too, because I love Tom Hanks. We all know I'm a Hanks fan, and I believe both of his sons were in the movie. Like one of his sons played him, and the other son has a rap song that's playing in part of the movie. I don't know. Easter eggs like that I think are very funny. Tom Hanks is probably my favorite actor. The next book that I want to talk about is another like literary mystery, and this is Saint X by Alexis Shaken. I don't know exactly how that last name is pronounced. I believe, and I could be wrong about this, but it reminded me of a real case, and I think it might have been partially based on a real case. But the premise of the book is the main character, whose name I think is Emily or Claire. Her name is either Emily Claire Thomas or Claire Emily Thomas. I can't remember which one, but she switches what she goes by after this thing happens to her family. When she's a little girl, her older sister is murdered while her family is on vacation in like a Caribbean island. And they think they know who did it, but they don't really know. Someone who they think is like involved in it is a guy who is a local to the island, and he worked at the resort that they were staying at. And so that's like what happened in the background. And in the present day story that you're sort of following, she's an adult woman who's like kind of never really gotten over this. Like, I don't know how you would get over something like this, but she sees the guy in a restaurant in New York City who she thinks was involved in her sister's murder. And she like meets with him and talks to him, and it's just about like that. That's like the setup. I really feel like I can't say much more than that. This book was so good. And I read this, full disclosure, because I was planning on there's a TV show adaptation of it now, and I still haven't watched it, but I was planning on watching it and doing a book versus adaptation review, and then my life got really busy and I didn't do it. All of that to say, I loved this book. I did not expect to like it as much as I did, and when I was reading it at first, I felt like it was really slow, so I do think you have to go into it knowing it's not like genre fiction mystery thriller. It's very much a slower pace, like literary mystery. And it's not a thriller. It's just like kind of it's like a literary fiction book with like a mysterious vibe. I really loved it. It was so good. And like it really explores grief, which is a thing that I love. It really explores familial relationships, which is a thing that I love. And it really explores like, I don't know, prejudice, which I don't know if that's a thing that I love, but I liked the way it was handled in this book. So yeah, that was a really, really good book, and I'm very glad that I read it. The seventh best book that I read this year, The Deep Sky by Yume Kitasai. And this one I think is a little controversial. So this is a sci-fi thriller set in space. And the premise is it follows these primarily women. There are some non-binary people and some trans men, but you have to have female sex organs to be accepted for this mission, because all of these people, when they were kids, were like trying out to be a part of this team, and they were rigorously training and all of this stuff to be chosen to go in the space mission to sort of save the human race and go to another planet and populate that planet. But they got sperm donors from Earth, so that the only people in the ship are the people with the female sex organs, who are supposed to have 2 to 4 pregnancies, I think, ideally, while they're in space. And they have like timelines when they're all supposed to be getting pregnant, so that there's a full crew at all times, because they're supposed to be repopulating the Earth. And then at the beginning of the book, a sort of disaster has taken place where there was like a bomb somewhere, and it has killed one of the girls, and then they don't know who set the bomb. So they're trying to figure out what has happened. And it's about how they can't really trust each other, but it also flashes back to when they were in this training program. And our main character has been chosen as a representative of Japan, but she grew up in the US and she's only half Japanese. So it's sort of about like how she ended up being the Japanese ambassador on this ship. It also talks about like the political things that are happening back on Earth and how that's affecting the way that people are interacting, because each of these people are representatives from one of the most powerful countries in the UN, right? So based on your power level in the UN is how many people got to go, and then there were lottery winners. Like some people were nominated just out of a lottery, if that makes sense. I hope it does. It was so good, and like I really loved the mystery aspect of it. I loved the concept of it so much, and I had a great time exploring the like dynamics between the characters, because again, it focuses a little bit on toxic friendship, but also like just the things that someone will do to succeed. The least interesting part about this book for me is the actual mystery, but I think all of the things that it explores leading up to that are so interesting. So I know that doesn't really sell it, but what I liked about this book was not the like thriller aspect. What I liked about it was everything else. And I loved it. Like I absolutely loved this book, and the cover is beautiful. So like what more could you ask for, really? My sixth favorite book that I read in 2023 was Part of Your World by Abby Jimenez. I actually wasn't going to read this one. Yours Truly came out this year, and I was planning on just reading that one because it sounded more interesting to me. Plot twist, I ended up liking Part of Your World much more than I liked Yours Truly. And I don't know exactly why that is. It could be about the time that I read it at. I literally listened to this in one day with my like headphones while I was doing a puzzle, and it was the like best Saturday I've ever had in my entire life. But this book follows this girl, I think her name's Alexis, and she is a surgeon at a hospital in Minneapolis, I think. And one day she's driving home from a funeral, and she gets stuck in a ditch in this small town in Minnesota. And this guy comes to pull her out. They have kind of a rough first meet where she's like, no, thank you, I will just wait for the tow truck. And he's like, okay, well, the tow truck driver is drunk at the only bar in town, so you're gonna be waiting until he sobers up tomorrow. Or you can just come with me. And she ends up going with him to the bar, meeting him, hanging out with him. They end up having a one-night stand. And at some point after this one-night stand, she finds out, because I think she's like in her late 30s, she's just had an engagement broken off. And at some point she finds out that this guy is like 27, 28, 29, somewhere. He's like in his late 20s. And she thinks, oh my God, like that's so young for me. But also this guy owns this bed and breakfast, and he is the mayor of this town. And he's trying to like fix up this bed and breakfast to make it like a destination for people to come to. And he has like a baby goat. And there's all this like very cute, homey, small town vibes. And then Alexis, our main female character, is having all of these problems with her family back home because her brother has gone off with Doctors Without Borders, and he was sort of supposed to stand in her father's footsteps and like become head of this hospital. And now her dad is sort of expecting her to do that, but she doesn't really want to do that because she practices, she might be like general medicine, whereas her dad was like a brain surgeon, something like that. But essentially like the dad is either a cardiovascular surgeon or like a brain surgeon, and neither of his kids did the same like ambitious thing as him, and he's kind of pissed about that. And also like he always expected his son to take over everything, and his son has sort of been like, bye. So now Alexis is like, well, now I'm sort of expected to do everything, whereas I never was before. So it's like kind of like the family politics of that. And she's also like dealing with this breakup and then falling in love with this guy that she thinks is wildly inappropriate for her. I loved this book. I loved them as a couple. I really liked the way that everything was handled, and I won't spoil the ending, but it's a trope that I usually am like, God, of course. But in this one, like it actually made sense and it worked really well. So for me, 10 out of 10. I loved this book. The fifth book, and this is the last one that I'm like pretty set that it should go here because I don't think I liked this book more than any of the other ones that I'm going to talk about, is The Cartographers by Ping Shepard. And if you have been on this channel for a while, you know that The Book of M by Ping Shepard is one of my favorite books of all time. And this one is joining right up in those ranks. I love this book. So this follows Nell, who her whole aspirations, her whole life was to be a cartographer with the New York Public Library, because that's what her dad did. And she did all the things she needed to do. She went to school, she got a PhD, she got like an internship at the public library. And one day while she's interning, she finds this box of old maps, and some of them appear to be very valuable. And so she brings them to her dad's attention, and she's like, look at these maps. And also in there is like one of those gas station foldable map things. And her dad gets like really mad at her. He basically tells her they're all fake. None of them are valuable at all. He gets like so heated that it doesn't really make sense why he would get that mad. And then he fires her and they don't speak again. And then after his death, she's called to his office to go through his things. And she finds in a folder this gas station map that she found X years before, like 10 or 15 years before. And she's shocked that he would keep this map of all the maps that were in that thing that she thought were valuable, like this is the one that he's held on to. She finds this map and she's like, it's so weird that he would keep this map. And then she ends up finding out that there are discrepancies on the map. Like there are things on the map that don't exist in real life, specifically this one town. And then she realizes with the map, she can go to this town. So I hope I've intrigued you. I'm not going to tell you what else happens, but the premise is it's like magical realism where if you can put something on a map, then it becomes real, kind of. And so the book is sort of about that. And then there's all this other like outside world stuff that she starts running into. And it's very interesting. I will say, if you didn't like the Book of M, I do not think you would like this book, because the main complaints that I heard about that are that you never really find out what's going on. And like, it's very much like an improv type thing. Not from the writer, but like the reader is sort of expected to just buy into this thing without a whole lot of explanation. And that's sort of similar here. Like there's not a lot of explanation on why this map works the way that it does. But I think if you can buy into the reality of the scene, I think you would enjoy it. Now we're at the top 4, which realistically on a different day could go in a different order, but I'm gonna do it in this order today. And so at number 4, I have How High We Go in the Dark by Sequoia Nagamatsu. And this is one of my favorite types of books because it's not novellas, but like, and not short stories, but it's a compilation of things in one world where the characters from one story will be in another story, but as like peripheral characters, kind of like the movie Love Actually. It's not actually anything like that movie, like it's not a rom-com, but it's the same type of thing where you're following a bunch of different stories that have something to do with each other. And in this world, it's set in the future, there's been a pandemic, everyone is pretty much dying, and it's like following what people do with that news. I love this book. It made me sob at various different points. There's one particular point where these scientists are trying to figure out how to cure it, and somehow they end up making a pig talk, and that, boy, made me sad. I have a distinct like memory. I was at the gym working out, and I ended up like sobbing while I'm like running on the, not running, but using the elliptical or whatever. Oh, it made me sad. But this is a type of story that I really enjoy, where it's multiple smaller stories that combine like that. I don't really know how to describe it, and I don't know, there's probably a word for it, but I don't know what it is. I love that book. And I think if you haven't read it, if you like science fiction, cli-fi, which is like climate change science fiction, I think you would like it. If you're okay with reading books about pandemics, I think you would like it. I just thought it was so well done. And I loved the way everything tied together. For me, it was like chef's kiss, a masterpiece. The third best book that I read this year is The English Patient by Michael Ondaatje. And this is historical fiction. I believe it came out in the 90s or the 80s, but it's about World War II. In the aftermath of World War II in Italy, there used to be in this Italian villa a like hospital set up, and we're following a Canadian nurse who was in this hospital when it was still active, and she has a patient who she calls the English patient. She doesn't know anything about him, who was a burn victim. So he was in a plane crash and he's like completely burned up. And so he couldn't be moved, so she decided to stay with him at this hospital and try to nurse him back to health. And it's also like implied that she's a little in love with him. And then we also get Caravaggio, who knew the nurse, whose name I'm not going to remember now, so sorry about that, when he was like friends with her dad back in Canada, and he was in the war. Her dad died in the war. That's the other reason she's not leaving, is because she feels like she has nowhere to go. And Caravaggio comes and finds her because he hears rumors that she's at this villa, and he ends up staying at the villa with them. And then they also meet this other guy, Kip, who is from India, but he was trained by the British Army to take apart bombs, and that's what his job is. And he ends up staying at this villa too. And this book like emotionally wrecked me. So you get the perspectives and like the stories as they're happening in present day, but you also get like past timelines for how each of the characters ended up there. And then you eventually get the full story of the English patient, because that's kind of the like intrigue throughout, is that nobody really knows anything about him. He talks in bits and pieces. He has this book that he has like handwritten notes in. And then Caravaggio has this theory that he's someone specific. I don't know if it's a spoiler to say, so I'm not going to, but I don't know. I loved this book. I really want to watch the movie. I know there is a movie from the 90s about it. I have not yet, but I don't know. I think Willem Dafoe is in it. So, but that was my third favorite book of the year. My second favorite book I own. How exciting. Cloud Cuckoo Land by Anthony Doerr. I loved this book. I read it for the Buzzword Readathon. One of the months was Weather Words. I did vlog my experience reading it. And this book follows 3 timelines, if you will. So there's a timeline in the, I'm not going to remember what year, like the 16th century, the 15th century, the 10th century, 15th century, okay. And it follows this girl named Anna, who's a weaver, but she's not very good at it and she wants to learn to read. So she finds this guy who teaches boys to read. And she asks him to teach her to read, and he does, and she ends up reading the story, Cloud Cuckoo Land, the title of the book. I'm going to set it down. But she ends up learning to read. She reads the story. And the story is what like connects all of these plot lines. So then there's a present day timeline where you're following like an 80-something-year-old guy who is directing a play of Cloud Cuckoo Land at the library that is near him. And it's a play that children are in. So it's a lot of little kids that he's like directing in this play, Cloud Cuckoo Land. And then in the future timeline, there's a girl in space and she is currently all alone because something horrible has happened to her like family, and she ends up finding through like the interface the story of Cloud Cuckoo Land, and it's about how all of these things combine. I don't know how much is a spoiler. Oh, okay, great. So it does say on the back. So in the library timeline, like the present day-ish timeline, there's a kid named Seymour who's like very troubled, who is planning to like bomb the library. And so that's what like the present day timeline is about. And the last line on the back of this says, Anna, Seymour, Zeno, and Constance are dreamers and outsiders whose lives are gloriously intertwined. Anthony Doerr's dazzling imagination transports us to worlds so dramatic and immersive that we forget for a time our own. And I loved this book, okay? This book was so good. Highly recommend if you have not read it yet. I really think you should. I remember seeing this everywhere and just thinking the cover was beautiful, so I ended up picking it up because of that. And I am so glad that I did because I love this book. And then now we're going to talk about my number 1 book of the year, which I think will be a lot of other people's number 1 books of the year. And I think it also was a favorite for people in 2022, which is when it came out. And that is Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow by Gabrielle Zevin. This, I know everybody loves. And it features one of my other favorite things in books that I am surprised that I like, but it's video games. I love video games and books. Don't know why. I don't really play video games in real life, but for some reason a video game and a book works for me really well, which is bizarre. But this book follows, her name is Sadie. Why did I say Zadie? Okay. Sam and Sadie. And then, who's their friend? Marks? Is that his name? But anyways, they meet when they're kids in the like, in a children's hospital because one of them's sister is sick, I think, and the other one is a volunteer. And so they're friends when they're kids, and then they have a falling out, and they don't see each other again until way later. But when they were kids, they really bonded over their love of video games. And then they meet again in Harvard Square. One of them goes to MIT, I think it's Sadie, and then the other one goes to Harvard. I could be mixing that up. But they end up deciding to work together to create this video game. The video game becomes a sensation, and this whole book, you know, from like interview snippets in the future or like the present day, that their relationship sours, but you don't know how that happens or when or like what happens. So the book is you like figuring that out. So you're following them legitimately, I think, for like 30 or 40 years of their lives. And I loved this book. I really like, the cover is beautiful, obviously, but like I can't say enough good things about this book. I loved the character explorations. Again, it's not really toxic friendship, but it's kind of like in Sylvia Moreno Garcia's book where they like kind of like each other at different times and then never quite click. Like there's never really something romantic there, but at various times one or the other will want there to be. And it's about like how going into a business relationship with someone can really sour a relationship. It's about like artistic differences in their like game design process, and one of them wanting the game to be one thing and the other one wanting the game to be another thing, and how they want different things with their lives. And then there's like some really tragic things that happen in this book. I just really loved it. I think if you haven't read it yet, I would recommend. I recommend all of these books, obviously, but I hope my descriptions of them have given you an idea of what would work for you and what would not work for you. That's it. those are my top 10 favorite books of 2023. Let me know in the comments down below if you've read any of these and how you felt about them. Also, let me know what your favorite book of 2023 was, because I might have to add it to my TBR if I've not read it already. Subscribe to my channel if you have not already. I do post 2 videos every week. Give this video a thumbs up if you liked it, and I will see you in another video very soon.